Hi guys, what's up? Welcome back to my channel. Different change of scenery. I decided to film in my car today, but I thought I would share some of my favorite podcasts. I feel like the car is like the perfect setting for this video because I listen to a lot of podcasts when I drive, but I love podcasts in case you haven't figured that out already. But also, for those who are new, I have my own podcast, which is called Blooming Roses. And it is where we share stories of growth while blooming in adversity. And currently we're in season 2. And I interview different guests who have not only impacted my life, but they've also inspired the community around them. So I have different guests ranging from close friends of mine, people living with cystic fibrosis and being cystic fibrosis advocates, authors, dancers. I've even interviewed Justin Baldoni, Rachel Lippincott, and just some more amazing people, and also like social media influencers. So it's been an incredible opportunity to have this podcast, and yeah, I love meeting and talking to everybody who I've talked to on the podcast. So it's definitely very special, and because of that, I also love listening to a lot of podcasts and supporting other creators. But for my podcast, you can find it on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, and wherever else you stream your podcasts. And so I'll have all the links below so you can go and check that out. New episodes come out every Tuesday. So with all that said, I'm just going to hop in and just start talking about other podcasts that I enjoy. I'm going to have a little Spotify barcode on the side right here for you guys, like you would have seen a few minutes ago with my own podcast. But I'll have a little Spotify barcode here for the other podcasts. But if you don't listen to Spotify, I'll also have the Spotify, but also the Apple Podcast links below of these different podcasts in the description box below, just so you guys can go and check those out. Okay. I feel like that's better. I was also trying to fix the lighting a little bit. I feel like the lighting is a lot better, except you can see a little sun streak. Like the little light things, if you can see that, like right there and there's like those little light spots. But I feel like that is what helps the lighting, so I'm sorry you're gonna have to deal with that, but I wanted to film in my car today. Starting out with the first podcast, that is Unmistakably Star Wars, and they no longer make new episodes for this podcast anymore, but there's still plenty of episodes out there for you to listen to. This is actually the podcast that got me to fall in love with podcasts, but also I was once on this podcast. I was on the team, I was a contributor, so I'd pop on an episode every so often, but I'd mostly write articles for their website. But this one, talk all things Star Wars, since it's called Unmistakably Star Wars. And it's what helped grow my love of Star Wars, but also helped grow my love of podcasting. But it's honestly such a fun podcast to listen to. I still love to go back, and I feel like I still haven't listened to all the podcasts yet. I was on the team for a couple years, but there's tons of podcast episodes that I haven't even listened to yet. But yeah, it's just a fun podcast, especially if you love Star Wars. I highly recommend it. And the founders, the creators of it, were 2 high school teachers of mine who I'm still in contact with till today. And I feel like that's all I can really say. It's all things Star Wars, so it's a lot of fun. Keeping the Star Wars theme for a second, this is actually a new podcast. Like, it's brand new, and also I just discovered it a couple months ago, but brand new. And it's called Queens of Naboo, and these are two girls who talk about Star Wars, but with a women's perspective, which I really like because you get to have more in-depth conversations of the women of Star Wars, but also just a different point of view. Star Wars is very much like a masculine type of fan base, so it's really nice when you get to find those those girls, those women in the Star Wars fan base as well. So it's kind of like Unmistakably Star Wars, where they talk all things Star Wars, but it's just with a different perspective, and I really like and appreciate that. Plus, both of them had actually been, what's the word? Cast member? I think that's what it's called, but they were a cast member at Disney. So they've experienced they have a little background of like Disney and Star Wars and such, which is pretty cool. So I really love listening, hearing that perspective as well. Next, this is created by, again, the two founders of Unmistakably Star Wars. They created this podcast, and it's called Living in the Past. And basically they talk about their favorite movies from the 80s and just from their childhood and growing up and such. And I honestly, I'm a film major, for anyone who's new to my channel. I'm a film major, but to be completely honest, the 80s, I haven't seen a lot of 80s movies because it's not my top favorite genre to watch. So because of this, I'm able to listen to more in-depth conversations about these films, and then it helps grow my curiosity of these movies and makes me want to go watch them or listen to certain 80s style music. My favorite era is the Hollywood Golden Age, like black and white, classic, 1930s to the 50s. But the 80s is that one era that I'm still like, about. But I really like listening to what they have to say about these movies, their thoughts about it growing up, but also, now that they're older, hear their thoughts about it now. But also, both these people were my teachers, so it's fun to hear their perspective. Honestly, it's great when you're friends with some of your high school teachers, because then you just have this different dynamic where you're all adults and can talk about whatever. So it's fun to like see and hear the side of them that I wasn't able to hear when I was their student. So it's a great podcast. I really enjoy listening to it. Next podcast is called On the Books, and one of the hosts is Rachel Lippincott, who's one of my friends. And she and a friend talk to different authors, YA authors, and they get to interview them and just to hear more of their story and a little bit more about their books. And it's such a fun, dynamic podcast, and also it's really interesting to hear like authors talking with authors. I think it's really cool when you get to hear from different people in the same industry talking about something common. I mean, the commonality that they all have, but how their experiences can be different or similar. I think it's really interesting. So I think this is a lot of fun. Plus, if you love hearing from different authors and hearing like how they got started and all that, highly recommend this podcast. It's a lot of fun to listen to. Plus, I get to learn more about Rachel in this podcast, so it's great to listen to her. Next is Whoa, That's Good podcast with Sadie Robertson. This one, to be completely honest, I don't listen to this podcast as much as I used to. When I first started listening to it, I mean, obviously, I listen to a lot of podcasts. But every time I do listen to this one, the guests or the message or whatever it is of the podcast, the theme of that podcast, it always encourages me. And I just love how much truth that they share on this podcast, and just to hear how God is using them in all their different career paths and all the different guests that are brought on, how God is just using them, and just to hear this podcast where they're all able to share and talk about their testimonies. And I think that's really, really special. The next podcast is Redefining Purity with Annie and Kaya. And I actually know both of these girls, and honestly, I love listening to their podcast. It brings so much encouragement to me, and it's just amazing to see how God is working in their lives. And I've watched these girls grow up, so to see them being kind of shy to where they are now and just sharing all of these topics that God has put on their heart, it's beautiful to see, and I'm honestly so proud of them. So I love listening to this podcast, and it definitely encourages me every single time I listen to it. Last but not least is Pretty Real with Rachel and Alyssa, and I honestly love this podcast a lot. So these are previous film students. They're now in the entertainment business, and with me being in film school and wanting to go into the entertainment business, I learn a lot from this podcast. They talk about things they wish they knew, the advice they have in certain things. They also talk about different movies or actors or just things going on in the entertainment industry, whether that's things you should know, discussions that should be happening, or just things that they like and don't like. And honestly, it's a really chill and relaxed podcast, and they also interview other people and other friends that they have in the industry, and it's so interesting to hear from them. There's one person that they knew who actually worked on WandaVision, which was Marvel's WandaVision, which was really, really cool to hear about because I love that TV show. But it's my favorite just because I'm learning a lot from this, and I love hearing from other people in the business. But it's a fun podcast. I love it. So if you like what you heard of all the different podcasts and something sparked your interest, definitely go and check those out. But also, if you guys want to hear a little bit more in depth of 3 different podcast hosts of who I just mentioned, I've actually interviewed a few of these people. So Devin Klepper, who was the founder and co-host of Unmistakably Star Wars and the co-host of Living in the Past, episode 1, season 1 of the Blooming Roses podcast. I actually interviewed him, and we got to talk about our friendship, but also what's like having him as my teacher, and podcasting stories. So definitely go and check that out. Then episode 12 of season 1 featured Rachel Lippincott, who is the co-host of On the Books, and we talked about her career as an author and different books that she's written and what she's learned. And then yesterday, for episode 34, season 2 of the Blooming Roses podcast, I interviewed Rachel Kirby, who is the co-host of Pretty Real, and we talked about the entertainment business, what she learned in school, her small business, but also her podcast, which was honestly such a great conversation. So that came out yesterday. So I've definitely talked to a few of these people, and I do in future, I would love to talk to more of these co-hosts and creators of these podcasts. I think that'd be really cool and really special. So I'm working on that. But yeah, so those are my favorite podcasts. So be sure to check them out. Again, I had the screen codes up, so feel free to rewind and catch those if you didn't. And I also have all the links below. So definitely go check those out, and maybe this will help you guys if you're going on a road trip or just need something new to listen to. I got you covered. So with that said, I will see you guys next week. Bye.